Today's daf we're going to be learning is Ketubot daf tzadi hey. Today's daf is sponsored by Deborah Spinner in loving memory of her mother and mother-in-law. We're going to get started from the bottom of tzadi dalet amud bet. The last case we saw, we're kind of in the middle. There were two documents. Okay, today's going to be all about, we're going to start with the case of two people having a document for the same land. That's going to be different than the cases we're going to discuss later, where there's disputed property, but more because of liens on property and who gets money and who's deserving of what. So I want to distinguish between those two types of cases. This is a case where somebody has a document, I bought the land in Nisan, and someone else has a document that said, I bought that same land on the 5th of Nisan. So now they go before Rav Yosef and they both says that we bought the property. So what happens? Uchme Rav Yosef, I'm starting from 4 lines from the bottom. You have to have a firm proof, right? If you want to claim something's yours and not someone else's, you have to prove it. Okay, it's a little bit different because it's not like anyone was the muhzak in the property, but who has the better proof? Basically, the land is his, the one who says on the 5th, because the one who says Nisan could have been, he says on the 25th, the 29th, he gives us an example. He says, right, so Amar le'idach v'ana afsi, the second guy says, I'm going to lose out. Amar le, Rav Yosef said to him, At yadcha l'tachtona, sorry, but you have the least rights possible because Eim abar kaf tepenisana. You could say, so, the other buyer could say, that guy had the 29th, meaning it was sold to me. When he bought it, the person who sold it wasn't even the owner of the property because he had already sold it to me. Since you don't have any proof that yours was earlier, you can't. Now, what happens? So this guy wants to get his money back, at least, right? So what does he say? Amar le, he says to Rav Yosef, "V'nichtov limal tirfa mi'ir ve'ela." At least then give me something so that if I go back to the original owner and he doesn't have the money to return to me, at least write to me from the 1st of the following month, 1st of ER, right, the next day, that any land, right, because for sure, I can get basically the worst case scenario, my document was from the 29th, which means that from the 1st of ER, I can collect, if I go back to the seller and he doesn't have the money, any land he sold after the 1st of ER and on, from the 1st of ER and on, basically, I can demand that land back for the money that I put out that I didn't actually get anything for. I paid money. I want it back. Any buyer from the date of the 1st of ER, write me a document, the deed that I can demand money from them. Okay, I can get the land back from them. Okay, because this is all about lien property. Remember, if the seller owes this buyer who really bought nothing, right? But he owes him the money back. So from the day he owes him the money back, which is really the 29th of Nisan, but what's the problem? You can't write the 29th of Nisan because it could be they bought them, right? Anyone who he sold property to after that, that's why it would have to be the next day, because if it was the same day, maybe he sold it to them before this document was written. So it would have to be the next day, but from the next day, right? He says in the worst case scenario, the 29th of Nisan. So at least write from the 1st of ER, any property that he sold, I can demand it back in place of this money that I'm out. So comes Rav Yosef, he says, well, I can't exactly do that because again, if they want to collect, he wants, right? Let's say it was me who had this Nisan document, which really didn't help me. If I'm going to get money back, I'm going to go to someone. Yachle Rabbi Meir, he could say to him, At barcha b'nisanat. Any buyer can come, right? If I go to someone who, let's say you gave me this document that was really not a real document because you didn't own the land. You already sold it to your friend before me. But we don't know actually, right? Maybe you sold it to me first. We really don't know. And that's the problem. So now the person who you sold it to said the 5th of Nisan, they're living in the land, it's theirs. So I'm going to get my money back. So I go, right? I ask Rav Yosef to write me this document so that anyone you sold land to from the 1st of ER, I can collect from them. What's the problem? When I go to collect from them, what can they say to me? They can say to me, we don't owe you any money. Why? They could say, At bar chad b'nisanat. Maybe your document was the 1st of Nisan, and maybe you should be the one living in the land. Go prove it. Can't prove it? Well, I can. In other words, go prove that you're not from the 1st of Nisan, and you're not the one who was deserving of the land. It's true, they the judge ruled that you can't live in the land, but I don't have to return you my land because maybe you're the one who's supposed to be living in the other property that you claim you bought. So basically, he's stuck. He can't do anything. He can't claim the land because maybe he was on the 29th of Nisan, but he also can't claim land back from any lien property going forward of the owner because he can't prove that he's actually not the one who's right. He's the one who's actually not supposed to get the land. So since he can't prove either which way, he's stuck, to which the Gemara says, "My takante." So how can he fix this? So there is a solution. Nichtivu harsha'a lahadadi. What can he do? He can have the other person who had the 5th of Nisan. We have the guy who has the contract with the 1st of Nisan, Nisan, no date, and one who has the 5th of Nisan. So now, if he gets power of attorney, so it sounds like a harsha'a, power of attorney from the other guy, who's the 5th of Nisan, who's living in the land, that basically says, if you claim that he owns the land, then give me back this land in place of my loan. And basically he comes, if he says, listen, I want the land. And the guy says, well, prove it to me that you're not the one living there. He says, fine, you don't think me? Well, I'll collect it on behalf of the other guy then. You think I'm the one who's supposed to be living in the land? Well, if that's the case, then give me this land for the first guy who's actually living in the land, right? Give me your piece of land that you bought because he's now out of the money. So basically he can come with one of two options and then collect it no matter what. This is very similar to the case of the Shnei Shvilim, if you remember. There were two paths. We know there was Tuma on one of them, and one person walked on one and one person walked on the other. We don't know who walked on the Tameh one and who walked on the Tara. But when we put them together, we know that for sure someone was impure, right? If they're separate, then each one could be, maybe you're impure, maybe you're not. It's Safek Tuma. But once we have both of them together, then we know that one is impure. So it's the same thing here. If he comes by himself, he can't claim. The other guy can always say, maybe you were this, maybe you were that. There's always, everyone can knock him to the side. But if he comes with the power of attorney of the other, then the two together, it's clear that whoever bought the property from the original seller from the 1st of Iyar, for sure he has to pay one of those guys back because one of them is out of the money. New Mishna. Misha haya nasoi shtei nashim. If you thought that was confusing, this is also going to be a confusing case. Someone's married to two women. Umachar et tzadei. And he sold his field. Okay, now that field is liened to the two ketubas. Who gets first rights to the ketuba? The first wife. We already learned this. The woman who is married first gets first dibs. But what happened? Ketubah rishona, the first one wrote la lokeach to the buyer. Dinu dvarim ein le'ima. She wrote to him. This is going to be the subject of today's daf. Is somebody who says to somebody who buys property that's liened to her, right, to her collection, in this case to a ketuba, she says, I'm not going to collect it from you. Okay, she says, don't worry. This is, as far as I'm concerned, I won't collect my ketuba from you. So now she can't, okay? But what happens? There's still a second wife, and she didn't give up her rights of the ketuba. So because of this, it's going to be this very funny case. When the husband dies, the second one can claim her ketuba from the buyer. The first one can't. But what can the first one do? First one has rights to the ketuba before the second wife. So once the second wife collects the land that was the husband's land, that was liened to her ketuba, right now, she said to the buyer, I'm not going to take it away from you. But she never said anything to the second wife. So when the second wife collects the land for her ketuba, the first wife can say, oh, that land was liened to my ketuba, and I have first dibs to the ketuba. So rishona min hashniya. The first one can take it away from the second wife and say, oh, this land is for my ketuba. Then what happens? The buyer already had a deal with the first wife that she wouldn't get involved in the land that he bought. So lokech min harishona. The buyer can now collect it from the woman, the first wife, and say, but you told me you weren't going to take my property, and I see you have my property. So he can take it from her. Then what happens? Chozrot chalila. And then once he gets the property, the second wife says, oh, but that was liened to my ketuba. And then the first wife says, oh, that was liened to my ketuba. And then the buyer says, oh, but you told me you weren't going to take my land. And this could keep going around in circles. Yes, I like your line, Caroline. It sounds like a Marx Brothers movie, right? So basically, this could just keep going around. So what do? They have to come up with some sort of compromise situation, because by law, this could just keep going around and around and around. We're going to see the same thing. We'll have to see what this is when the Gemara gets there, what the case with the Baal Chov and what the case with a woman who's a Baal Chov in a similar situation. So now the Gemara first starts off saying, wait a minute. This was all based on the fact that the first wife can say, Din udvarim ein li imach, right? I'm not going to have anything to do with this field. And that works, basically, right? In other words, it doesn't work in the end. In the end, she can have something to do with the field, but it works as a claim that basically she can't collect it directly from the buyer. And then he can claim it back from her once it's in her property. So it seems to be effective, to which the Gemara says, so what if she writes that? It's not a valid declaration. How do we know this? We learned this already. Tanya, we had a braita that talked about two partners. We have a partnership. If I use those words and I say, I don't want to have anything to do with this field, or right, no business with it, and my hands are removed from it, it's meaningless, because I probably just said it out of anger. Now here, it's a little bit different, and it's interesting that they compare these, because here the woman is not talking about land, right? What did we say there? That probably the partners got upset with each other, and just one shouted at the other, I don't want to have anything to do with this business anymore. And it doesn't mean anything because it was probably just out of anger. And the main thing is that this language is not a language that can basically remove you from ownership over property. When you have actual ownership, you're a partner in a firm, you can't just in a line say, I'm not going to have anything to do with this. So how could this woman, and this, by the way, shows something, at least according to this Gemara, about shibud, that when you have a shibud on property, right, this property is liened to something you're owed, it's as if you have some sort of ownership on it, because the whole point is we can't remove this woman from ownership over this property, even though she never owned it, right? This is her husband's property that she has rights to demand once he's dead. But it shows that shibud must be some sort of, you must have some sort of ownership over it. Otherwise, this comparison wouldn't make sense. And in fact, when the Gemara answers this question, they're not going to say it's not a fair comparison. They're two different situations. They view it as if it's the same. So basically, we're going to say that how could that language mean that she really fully gives up her rights to something when it's clear from this partnership case that that language doesn't mean that? So therefore, right, it could be explained in other different ways. Maybe she just said it for some reason, etc. To which the Gemara says, it must be that he did a kinyan with her. And once, if you're angry about something, you say, I don't want to have anything to do with this. So it doesn't mean anything. But if you actually did a kinyan and you did, took a handkerchief and lifted it and showed you're serious about this, then it would actually be valid. So it would have to be a case where she did. Okay, so we resolve that right now, but not really. Because now the Gemara says, wait a minute. But wait, and now you're going to see why the woman, really, it's not such a good claim, okay? And why we're going to question this. Now here it's fascinating. Even if she did a kinyan, she can still claim, I didn't mean it, okay? Now, in the case of the partners, we had an ulterior motive. What was the ulterior motive? Well, I was just angry. Now, it's not exactly an ulterior motive. It's just, you need an explanation to why I said something, but I didn't really mean what I said. I said it because I was angry with you and I was frustrated with the business and the way things were going. And I just made this statement, this rash statement. But with the woman, now we're going to say, not only does she have such a good excuse as to why she said this, that even in the event that she actually made a kinyan, okay, she did this handkerchief, showing that I'm really serious, she could still claim later, I didn't mean it. Why? And this shows the relationship between husband and wife in those days. Because she could say, Tema nachat ruach hasiti lebali. I just did it to make my husband happy. And if my husband wanted to sell this land, what was the problem? The guy didn't want to buy it because he said, it's liened to your wife's ketubas. So to be a nice wife, an obedient wife, and my husband was trying to sell it, and I wanted to help him sell it. So I lied and I told you that I was giving up my rights to it, but of course I wasn't giving up my rights. It was liened to me. I wasn't giving up my rights. I didn't mean it. And fascinatingly, she can say this. Okay, now we're going to see. Milotznan, doesn't it say in the Mishna? Lakach min ha'ish, v'chazar v'lakach min ha'isha. This is a fascinating case. Someone buys property from the man. And then, because he knows that it's liened to the wife's ketuba, he adds a little extra money, gives it to the wife and says, and with this money, I'm buying your portion of it. And I want you to basically say, I'm giving up my rights to the ketuba. Obviously, he doesn't give her the amount of the ketuba. He gives her a small amount of money, a little bit more to kind of, convince her to say, okay, I'll give up my rights. Mikho batel. Okay, this is not a valid sale. Why is it not a valid sale? Because it almost sounds like the woman she doesn't have free will to say what she wants. She's living under her husband's jurisdiction. And if her husband wants to make this sale, she's going to make it happen for her husband by basically agreeing to something she doesn't really agree to. And ad kedei kach, to what extent? That basically we say the fact that he bought her rights, he didn't really buy her rights. Okay? Alma, from here, what can you assume? She can basically say, I was just doing it to make my husband happy, okay? To appease him so that he'd be able to sell this piece of land. In which case, I didn't really mean it. Of course I didn't mean it, right? Like, well, why would I be crazy to give up my ketuba rights? Okay? So now we have a problem because the Mishna in Gittin seems very clear that she can, right? This is the Mishnah we just quoted. She can always claim, I didn't mean it. And our Mishnah says the first wife has no rights and the buyer can take it, right? Her saying din udvarim ainli b'nechasai, right? Basically doesn't work. Even if she did a kinyan. Okay, first we compared it to the other case and we said, well, that was a difference because that person just made a statement without any sort of action. But here, if she did a kinyan, it should work. And how could it work? If she could always claim, even though I did a kinyan. In that case, in the Mishnah, she even got money for it. Doesn't matter. So we're going to have some answers here. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rav Chisda lo kasha. In order to answer this question, and we're going to have three answers based on this other source that we're going to see, a braita, which shows a machloka between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda about this issue. Ha Rabbi Meir, ha Rabbi Yehuda. One Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir. That's going to be our Mishnah. And the Mishnah that we quoted in Gittin follows Rabbi Yehuda. Ditan, as it says in a braita. Katav larishon velo chatmano. Here we're having a different case where the husband, very similar though, but the husband sold, he only had one wife, let's say, and he sold 2 plots of land. The first plot of land, lo chatmalo, she didn't sign off on her rights. La sheni vechatmalo, but then she sold off on her rights to the second guy. Ibda ktubata. She loses her rights to the man to ketuba, both from number 1 and from number 2. Why is that? That's divrei Rabbi Meir. So let's go through. This is another law that we have to understand here, which is when you sell liened property, if you still have other property, okay, so the first buyer here, when he bought the land, he knew that the land was liened to her ketuba, but what? He knew that he was leaving another field in the hands of the husband and that the woman could collect her ketuba from that field. As long as there's other money, he could claim, go get it from the other field. So therefore, in this case, what happened? So when the first buyer bought it, he knew, even though he was buying liened property, it wasn't really liened property because there was available property in the husband's possession at the time that the woman collected her ketuba from there. So basically, he knew that they weren't going to collect from him. So now when he goes to collect, so I see Ruth, you're asking me a question, hold off, we're going to get to there. Then when he goes to collect from the other property, so now what happens? The second property, she already gave up her rights to. So she now wants to get her ketuba from the second property. She can't because she gave up her rights. She wants to get from the first guy. The first guy says, well, I left you land to collect from, so you can't collect from me. So basically, she can't collect property. So now, that's what Rabbi Meir says. Now that matches our Mishnah, where din udvarim ein li b'nechasai works, right? And she can't claim, it's clear, according to Rabbi Meir, she can't claim, I didn't really mean to give up my rights to the second guy, because then she'd be able to claim her ketuba from the second person, right? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, she could say, what are you talking about? I didn't really mean it. I was just doing it to make my husband happy. And then, and you, what do you have with me? Basically, she can collect it from the second buyer. Okay, so now, what's the problem with this? Well, the Gemara is going to say, according to this, our Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir, The Mishnah in Gittin follows Rabbi Yehuda, which sounds like a very good answer. Comes the Gemara and says, but wait, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who basically organized the Mishnah, it doesn't make any sense that stam la'ahacha ki Rabbi Meir, ustam la'ahatam ki Rabbi Yehuda. Generally, when Rebbe doesn't bring a machloket, it's because he holds that way. He wants to know, you to know this is the main halakha, right? All the time the Mishnahs are bringing machlokot. So sometimes he brings machlokot, sometimes he brings one opinion. So the assumption here, and this is an assumption the Gemara is making, is that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi viewed this book as one book, and it should all kind of fit in with each other. So if one place he mentions a Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Meir, one place he mentions a Stam Mishnahs like Rabbi Yehuda, that doesn't make any sense. They should both, his Stam Mishnahs, which show no machloket, should both be holding by the same person. So therefore, answer number one is not a great answer to say that one Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, one Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. So we're going to have two other answers here. Amar Papa bigrusha b'divrei hakol. We can really explain it according to everyone, although really what he's saying is Rabbi Yehuda, because why? What's he saying? Our Mishnah, what was the issue? Our Mishnah is about a divorced woman, okay? If she's divorced, she can't say what? Nachat ruach hasiti leba'ali, because she's not married. She could say, right, what happened? She got divorced, but she still didn't collect her ketuba. Her ketuba was liened. Her husband sold the property. She gave up her rights for whatever reason. It was her ex-husband. We don't know why. But she can't claim, I gave up my rights to be nice to my husband. If they're divorced, wasn't her husband anymore. She wasn't under his jurisdiction. There'd be no reason for her to do that. So that would then say that nachat ruach is a claim. And then really, even though it says divrei hakol, what it really means is it doesn't disagree with Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir would agree in the case of a divorcee that there's no claim. And the Mishnah in Gittin is like Rabbi Yehuda. Now, as Gita, as you're pointing out, it's true that usually, as a general rule, a Stam Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, but it's only a general rule. It's not always the case. So here you'd have to say the Stam Mishnah goes really like Rabbi Yehuda, because the Stam Mishnah in Gittin is like Rabbi Yehuda, because the Stam Mishnah in Gittin said that she could claim nachat ruach. It didn't exactly say those words, but it indicated that she could renege, and therefore it must be she could say nachat ruach. Rav Ashi Amar Kula Rabbi Meir. The other approach, and this would fit better with Stam Mishnah's Rabbi Meir, he explains, no, let's explain our Mishnah is obviously Rabbi Meir because he doesn't think she can claim nachat ruach. Now the Mishnah in Gittin, again, what did the Mishnah in Gittin say? The Mishnah in Gittin said, if she purchases it from, a man purchases it from the man, and then he purchases the land from a woman, he basically adds a little more for the wife so that she gives up her claim. Mikho batel, right? It's not valid. So now we're going to say why, and then why we assumed because she could claim nachat ruach. So now we're going to show that Rabbi Meir, or in some cases, Rabbi Meir will say she could claim nachat ruach. V'ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Meir hatam. Why did Rabbi Meir say you can't claim nachat ruach? Now, what was it? Let's go back to the case where Rabbi Meir appeared in the braita. What happened? There were two buyers. The first one, she didn't renege on her rights. The second one, she did. So now, that's the only thing we see Rabbi Meir saying in that case. So now what's unique about that case? There were two buyers. One, she didn't say anything about her husband. She didn't say, I'm giving up my rights. And then the second one, she did. So now Rabbi Meir is going to say, in that case, she can't claim nachat ruach hasiti leba'ali. Why? Ela b'shnei lekuchot, because there were two buyers. Da'amrela, if she wants to claim later, I didn't really mean what I said because I was just trying to appease my husband. Da'amrela, he could claim, the buyer can claim, if you were just doing it for nachat ruach, if you're being obedient to your husband, then why weren't you obedient in the first scenario? When he sold the first piece of land, if you claim, I always agree to what my husband says, well, then you should have agreed in the first case as well. And you didn't. So it's clear to me that you're not just a wife who agrees to everything her husband said, because and you're just doing things to appease your husband. Well, it doesn't make any sense then. So what do they say? Ela belokech echad. But if it's only one buyer and she reneged on her rights, afilu Rabbi Meir modeh. Even Rabbi Meir will agree. She could say, I only did it to appease my husband. Okay, so again, let's just be very clear. If there's, we have a few sources, so we have to organize them. In the braita, we have a machloket between them. That was the main source we saw with Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. So there, we're going to say specifically because she didn't renege on her rights with the first husband, with the first sale of her husband. Therefore, when she does it the second time, it must be she really meant it. And it wasn't just nacharuach. That would have to match Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah, right? Because why? Rabbi Meir in our Mishnah says that she can't say nacharuach. So what Rav Ashi has to do, Rav Ashi has to do in order to explain our Mishnah is to do what's called, again, an ukimta. Our Mishnah is in a particular situation where she reneged on her rights to this buyer that we were talking about. That was the whole situation. He was married to 2 wives, sold his field. The first one said, I'm not going to collect from you. Why can't she say nacharuach? Because earlier, you didn't know this, but earlier he sold some other piece of land and the wife didn't say anything to the buyer. She didn't say, I'm reneging on my rights. So therefore, she loses her rights to claim, I did it just to appease my husband, because if so, she would have done it for the first one too. Okay, and then manitin de katav leila acher. Our Mishnah must be where there was a situation with somebody else. Okay, so now we have an answer here that basically, and I want to just point this out very clearly, the assumption, so either we say, in other words, the 2 answers that get right, the first answer was one's Rabbi Meir, one's Rabbi Yehuda. Again, because let's just go through. Our Mishnah says she can give up on her rights and she doesn't have the rights to later say, I didn't mean it. The Mishnah in Gittin seems to say she could say, I didn't mean it. So either one Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, one Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Or our Mishnah is the case where she's divorced. I saw someone ask, if she's divorced, why didn't she collect her ketuba? We've already learned that a bunch of times. She gets mizona. Oh, the truth is no, that's not. That's a widow. My mistake. Why, if she's divorced, did she not collect her ketuba? It just could be she didn't get around to it. Okay, it could be she just didn't, right? We all know that there's many things we push off on our list of things to do, and she just didn't get around to it. So oftentimes you have cases where she's collecting her ketuba much later, right? Like we saw recently, the cases where the wife died, and then the husband died, and then the wife died, and she hadn't yet collected her ketuba. So it happens that she just didn't get to it. So then she's divorced, and that's why she can't claim nacharuach. And the third is that there was a buyer that came before her, and she didn't say, I give up my rights. And then the second buyer, she does give up her rights. And that's because even Rabbi Meir will agree that in a case where one guy she does it, one guy she doesn't, then you lose your rights to claim, I didn't mean it. That, by the way, is a weak answer. Why is it a weak answer? At least I think it's a little bit of a weak answer, because the assumption of that answer, there's logic to it, which is a woman who claims I did it just to appease my husband is the type of wife who just, says yes to everything her husband says to. You could say for shalom bayit, those kind of reasons. I see you right, Joanna, relationships change over time. That's also possible. I think, the more reason the relationship could change over time for some specific reason. Imagine the scenario. The first piece of land he sells and she won't renege on her rights. And then you can imagine what happens in the house after, right? Like he got a bad price for it because it was liened to her ketuba, and he got very upset at his wife for not reneging on her rights. So the next time it happened, she wasn't going to make that same mistake and upset her husband so much. Right? And she realized how much it upset him. So the second time she did. Theoretically, one could make an argument like that, but the Gemara doesn't think. Anyway, I'm just raising it as a question against this theory. Okay, next. Now we get to, and this was a question that Ruth asked, and I'm going to address it right now. The Gemara is going to address it. That's why I wanted to wait with it, which is Tnanata. Mishnah says, quoting a Mishnah elsewhere, Gittin, says, if, okay, I owe you money and I sold part of my land, and then I still had land at home, and you come to claim my loan, you have to take it from my land at home, even if it's poor quality land. That was your question, Ruth. What if it's poor quality land? Yes, here it says, even though a Baal Chov, we learned, collects from Benoni. If I took out a loan from you, you can collect from my average land. But in this case, if I left only poor land, you have to claim from the poor land, and you can't go to someone who I bought from. Okay, so even though we've been talking all along about lien property, there's rules that we're learning today, which is the first person who I sold to basically can get out of all sorts of things as long as I've left other money. And that means also if I later sold that to somebody else, right, that free land, when you come to collect the loan, you collect it from the last buyer, basically. Okay, so either you collect it from free land that I have, that's your first thing. If I don't have any free land, you go to the last buyer. So when the first buyer bought from me, knowing I had other land, he basically, if you come to collect from him, he'll say, I don't know you, go from, right? You could have collected from later land, even if we're going to see the later land is not available anymore. Okay, that's going to be our question. So we buy. So they ask the following question. Ish deduf b'nei chare mahu delitraf mi mishabti. What if the free land that I had, that you were supposed to collect from, got ruined? And I sold a month ago to somebody else some property. They bought it thinking I have free land, but now my free land got ruined. So do you have the rights to collect from the person I sold to? Okay, this is all about when they bought it, what impression were they under, right? Because that's what it all comes down to. And we all think, how could you collect from them? But they know going into it that I have a loan out. And they know that that you might come collect from them in the event that I don't have the money. But not if I had free land, because then they assumed you were going to collect from my free land. And even if I sold that free land, you go to that buyer and not to them. But now, if it gets destroyed, do you have the rights to collect from them? Or did they buy it thinking it was a done deal and you were going to collect from there? And now that it got ruined, well, tough luck on you. So that's the question. Tashma, they said, why don't we learn it from Rabbi Meir and the braita that we quoted before? What happened there? Katvala rishon velo chatmalo, lasheni v'chatmalo. So remember, there were two plots of land. The first one he sold, it was liened to my ketuba, but he sold it to someone. At that point, when he sold it, what happened? I didn't sign off at all. I didn't say I was giving up my rights. So theoretically, I could collect my ketuba from there. But what? My husband had more land. So that guy wasn't supposed to really pay me my ketuba anyway, because I was supposed to be able to collect it from the second. So now, lasheni v'chatmalo. Then she writes, he sells it to the sheni. Okay, I see someone's asking, katav la rishon v'lo chatmalo. Katav means the husband, the way I understand it, he wrote a document, meaning he sold it to the first person, and she didn't sign, meaning she didn't renege on her rights. The chatma is relating to her. Lasheni v'chatmalo. But the second one, she reneged on her rights. What did we learn? Ibdak tubata divrei Rabbi Meir. Now, what happens? She loses her rights to collect her tuba from both of them. Why? From the second one, she already said, I'm not going to collect my tuba from you. For the first one, why did she lose her rights? Because when he bought the land, she was able to collect from the second. The fact that in the end she couldn't, that's not his fault. So basically, what do you see here? From the fact that Rabbi Meir says she can't collect it from either person, shows you that in a similar case, now we'll see later, it's not really similar. Because in one, she reneged on her rights, and the other, the field got destroyed, not because of anything she did. In the end, we're going to distinguish. But right now, assume they're similar. How are they similar? Because in both cases, when the first buyer bought the land, there was other land for her to collect from. In the end, whether it's because she reneged on her rights or whether it's because the field got destroyed, it would be the same thing theoretically. Again, theoretically, we'll reject this later, but it sounds like it's the same idea. And yet, it says here, ibdak tubata. She can't collect her ketuba at all, even from the first buyer. So it seems clear that as long as he left free land, it doesn't matter what happens to that free land later, you can't collect from that first buyer. And that's what the Gemara is going to say. Isa kadatach, if you would have thought, ishaduf b'nei charei tarif mi mishabde, nihidi daktu batami sheni mi rishon mi atigbe. She should still be able to get it from the first one if you think that if it got ruined, you could collect from the first. Likewise here, if she reneged on her rights, she should be able to get it. So we're going to have two responses to this. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my ibda misheni. Maybe ibdak tubata means she can't collect it from the second guy, but maybe she can't collect it from the first guy. And therefore, the answer would be the opposite. In other words, you can't bring that as a proof, he says, because you don't know that ibda means she loses it from the first also. Sorry, it could be just the second. So Amar Rava doesn't like Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak's answer. He says, "Shtei tshuvot b'davar." I have two things against you, by the way. Rava said this already a few dapim ago. He had this a few times where he said, "Shtei tshuvot b'davar." I got two issues with you. Chada. One, the ibda legamre mashma. Ibdak tubata sounds like she lost it entirely. Okay, it doesn't sound like she lost it only from the second guy. Secondly, va'od Tanya says in a braita, "Lavan min ha'echad if I borrowed from you, umachar nechasav l'shnayim, and then I sold my property to two different people, v'katav ba'al chov l'lokech sheni, and you wrote to the second one. You said to the second person, dinu dvarim ein limach, you're not collecting from the second one. Ein lo alokech rishon klum, you can't collect from the first, exactly for the reasons we've been saying. Because when you sold it to the first guy, he knew you were going to collect it from the second guy. Sorry, when I sold it to the first guy, he knew you would collect from the second guy, so he doesn't have to pay you back. Because he could say, I left you to collect from the second guy. The fact that you gave up on your rights, that's not my problem. So, but Rava has a different explanation as to why you can't learn from these cases. So he disagrees with Rav Nachman, the understanding that ibdaktu batam means she only lost her rights from the second guy. No. She lost her rights entirely. But that is different, as I mentioned earlier. Why? Because she caused this, she brought this all upon herself by reneging on her rights. Why did she do that? If she hadn't, a field getting destroyed is not in her control, but saying I'm giving up on my rights was in her control to do or not to do. So in a case where she says I'm giving up on my rights, that is unfair to the first buyer to now make him pay because she was nice to the second guy. That's her fault. But if it got destroyed, again, it's not clear, but maybe it would be different. So we don't really have an answer, but he's saying you can't compare these two cases. Amalei Rav Yeimar le Rav Ashi. Rav Yeimar says to Rav Ashi, I'm going to try to get to an answer from a different place. V'hamasi b'chol yom. This is actually something that happens on a daily basis, even though in a second he's going to bring a specific case, which doesn't necessarily sound like a daily basis. Okay, we're at the top of Amud Bet. Dahu Gava, there was a person, I took out a loan from you. And instead of paying back the loan, what did I say? I said, use my orchard for the next 10 years. Get all the proceeds from my orchard, deduct that amount from the loan, and after 10 years, it'll pay you back all the money that I borrowed. What happened? You took it for 5 years, and then the field dried up, the orchard. There was nothing growing anymore. The whole thing dried up. They went to the rabbis, and what did they say? You can now collect from land that I sold, basically. Okay. So now, hatamnami. How can you learn from this? Because they're also theoretically inuhu de afsidu nafshe. So wait, stop for a minute. Already here before the Gemara is already going to reject this. The Gemara doesn't explain it, but what's the obvious explanation? If you can now collect from people I sold land to later, okay, in other words, now you're stuck without land and without getting back your loan. So you can go take from people I sold to in the interim. Now, why? Because, right, can't they say, but you had a pardes. When I bought the land, I bought it knowing that there was no lien on it, even though you owed money, right? Theoretically, I bought the land knowing that, let's say I sold you land. I sold you the land assuming, okay, this is tricky because you were the person who lent me the money. So let's start again. You loan me money. I gave you my pardes. And in the meantime, I sold off some other property of mine to someone else. That someone else could go to you and claim when you try to demand now from them, say, what are you talking about? Michelle gave you an orchard. You should be collecting from there. And you say it dried up. And they say, that's not my problem. But what does it say? No, you can collect from them. It is their problem. So what do you see? Even if it got destroyed, right? Or when it got, right? If the field gets destroyed, you can go claim it from the first buyer. So there would be your answer. You can. To which the Gemara says, no, it's the same thing there. In this case, the people I sold my land to should have anticipated this. Why? Because it's a known thing that orchards often dry up. The fruits don't last for years and years. I don't know why they think this, like a particular type of orchard, but they actually say the orchard is a vineyard and it's grapes. And often in a vineyard, after a number of years, it dries up. So therefore, they should have known that when they bought. But again, if it's a regular field that won't necessarily happen to, or it's a case where the field is there and theoretically it shouldn't get ruined and then it got ruined, so the case might be different. So therefore, you again can't learn from there. So this is our third attempt to try to learn, and we can't. Hilchata. The halacha is, it's actually the second attempt. The first attempt was rejected for two reasons. And now we have a second attempt. But in any case, the Gemara paskins hilchata ishadu pnei chare tarfim Mishna. The halacha is that if it got ruined, then they actually could collect from the lien property. So basically, even though they're saying when you buy liened property and you know they have other land, you don't have to worry they're going to collect from you. Well, you do have to worry on the off chance that something happens to that field, then they would come collect from you. But if they sold it to someone else, or if there was this orchard, if they had sold to someone else, then that's their problem, basically. And then you can't collect from it. If they gave up their rights, they renounced their rights, etc. Okay, now we're going to have two cases of Abaye. And the Gemara doesn't really say what the difference between the two cases are. There's some details missing. We're going to fill in the details. Only at the end, the Gemara is going to say that, but it's very hard to learn it without. So we're going to fill in the details as we go. Now our topic is nichse malog. Nichse malog are the property the woman brings into the marriage. Her husband gets to enjoy the proceeds while they're married. And then when she dies, he inherits it. So if somebody says to an unmarried woman, she's not married yet, says, nichasai lach, I'm giving you a gift, ula acharayach leploni, and after you die, it'll go to someone else. It's like a way of giving a gift. It's not going to go to your heirs. It's going to go to somebody else. Okay, so I want to give it to you, and then tomorrow to X person. Amda state, and then she goes and gets married. Now, a husband, ba'al lokeach, husband with the woman's nichse malog is considered like as if he bought it. Ve'ein la'acharayach bimkom ba'al klum. And when someone says, if someone gave me the property and then I sold it to someone, it would never go to that other person then, that the person told me it was going to go to. So now we're going to see this in a minute. Kiman, and the husband is like, it's as if he purchased the land, even though he didn't, but he purchased the rights to the land by marrying her. So then when she dies, it's going to go to the husband, and that third person will never get it. Ki haitana, it's like, we're going to see like Rashbag, not like the Tanakama here, Ditana, nichasai, or which is Rebbe. Nichasai lach ulacharayach leploni. This is not where a husband's in place. This is just someone says, my property goes to you, and after you, when you die, it'll go to someone else rather than to your heirs. Yarad harishon umachal, if I sold the property, hasheni, if you gave it to me and I sold it, hasheni motzi miyada lekuchot. The person who was promised the money after me could actually get it from the people I bought it from. And say, what do you mean? It was promised to me. You can't have it. Derived. That obviously doesn't go with what Abaye said. Rashbag omer, ein l'sheni ela masha shiur rishon. The second one only gets what the first one left over, meaning only if it was in my possession when I died, did they get it. So basically, Abaye holds like Rashbag. Amar, because again, the husband is like a buyer. Amar Abaye hachi. Did Abaye really say this? Hamar Abaye, Ezu Rasharu. In Masechet Sotah, he says, what is considered a deceptive, evil person? It's someone who tells you, if you want to make sure your heirs get this and you don't want to lose it when you die, so sell it to somebody else and then your heirs will get the money. And then it'll stay in your family's possession as opposed to having to go to this third person. That's an inappropriate thing to do, Abaye says. So what does the Gemara say? It doesn't mean she should get married. It's not like he's saying, in order to avoid giving this land to someone else, go get married. It's once she gets married, it's just one of the ramifications of having gotten married, but her husband happens to be a buyer here, and then it won't go to the other person. It's not like he's saying, go get married to avoid doing this. It's not a fair comparison. Second case, Amar Abaye. In this case, you have to say, otherwise it makes no sense, and the Gemara will say this soon, she's married already. So if someone gives the wife there, she wasn't married. When she got married, it automatically went to her husband instead of going to this third person. But Abaye says, if she's already married, and he says, this is going to you and after you to someone else, what's he basically trying to do? He's trying to bypass the laws of inheritance. Now, these laws of inheritance, that the husband inherits the wife's nichse malog, is only the takanav usha. Remember, the rabbis instituted that he was going to then inherit the stuff. Otherwise, right? So then, because of the takanav usha, he's basically overriding it and saying, listen, I don't want that to happen. I want it to go to someone else when she dies. So now, if she sells it to someone else, she sells it to someone else, it's not in the hands of the husband, it's not in the hands of the other person either, right? So what happened? The husband can claim it from the lekuchot because she didn't really have the rights to sell it because of takanat usha. He's supposed to inherit it. So he can take it out of the hands of the buyer. But the third party can say, but it wasn't supposed to go to you, it was supposed to go to me. This is sounding like our Mishna. But the buyer can say, what do you mean? She sold it to me, I get it from you. So now, instead of like our Mishnah, though, and this could keep going full circle, it says, but all the money stays in the hands of the buyer. To which the Gemara says, but wait, the Mishnah said, right? In the Mishnah, it could go full circle. So why can't you say again? Once it gets in the hands of the lokach, the husband can say, but my wife didn't have rights to sell you, the nechse malok. And then and then it could keep going on. They make a big distinction. This is very interesting. In our case, in the Mishnah, everyone was deserving of money. The woman was deserving her ketuba, the buyer was deserving their achrayut, right? There was every person, and the other woman also deserved her ketuba. They were each owed money. So it was a loss for all of them, and that's why they have to come to a compromise. In this case, both the husband and the third party there was supposed to get it as a gift. That was all gifts. That wasn't their own money. It was something that the wife had that was supposed to go to them, but it wasn't money out of their hands. They had no loss there. The only person who had a loss was the buyer, because the buyer put out money. And that's why in the end, it's going to end up in the hands of the buyer. Very interesting answer. Makes a lot of sense. But now, now we're going to talk about the difference between the two cases. How could Abaye say the second law? Because Hamar Abaye in the first case said, right? The acharayich has no rights. So how did this third party get to claim it from the hands of the buyer in case number 2? So Amarle, we already explained this. The first case was clear she was not married, because then it said, and then she got married. Because the second case doesn't say, and then she got married. It must be she was married already. I already explained this. What he was saying is, I'm overriding the takana of Usha, and your husband is not going to inherit this property. And that, when he's giving her a gift, he could do that. Okay, he could override that. I'm just going to go through the case of the Baal Chov. The Isha would be the same thing with the ketuba. So what Rashi explains here is that basically someone owed 100, and then he had 2 plots of land, but each was only worth 50, as opposed to 2 that were worth 100, which was the case before. Each was worth 50. Then what happens? So the Baal Chov, the creditor, said, I'm not going to collect it from number 2. Okay. So what happens now? He collects it from number 1, but it's only 50. He's still owed another 50. So now when he collects the 50 from buyer 1, now buyer 2, his land was already liened to achrayut for the first one. The first one who bought has rights to the second piece of land in the event that someone takes it from him. So he claims it from buyer 2, right? Because he says, what do you mean? I just lost 50. I'm taking the field that you bought later from the original guy who owes me. I'm taking it from you. Then what happens? Buyer 1 now has the money. Then the Baal Chov is owed still more money. He's still owed another 50. He can now claim it from buyer 1. And then buyer 2 can go to buyer 1 and say, that's my land. And you said you would have nothing to do with me. And basically, again, we could go full circle. And the same thing with a woman and 2 ketubas. And with that, okay, and as a woman, with 1 ketuba, but 2 buyers that, again, in this case, each one bought only part of the money, and that way they can claim it. They can end up taking the land twice from the first buyer. Okay. Almana nizonim nichse yatomim. We'll just read this Mishnah. We'll stop there. And Almana can get fed from the possessions of the yatomim, right? This is what happens when a woman dies. She can claim food payments. But she has to give them her salary. We'll see in Gemara, the first question is going to be, maybe there's 2 ways to read this Mishnah in this line, but we'll get to that in the next daf. But they do not need to bury her. So who does? The ones who inherit her ketuba, which the benim zcharim, her male children, they're the ones in charge of her burial. Okay, and that we'll get to in tomorrow's daf. More explanations of this Mishnah. Wishing everybody a Chag Sameach. It was a bit of a complicated daf. So you can go over it over Chag, and we'll meet up after the Chag. There's no Zoom on Monday, obviously it's Chag, and there's no Zoom this Wednesday, but the class will be up as usual, a bit earlier than usual, up on the site. So we're on the podcast, on YouTube, all that, from 6 a.m. Israel time. So other days of Chol Hamoed we'll be Zoom as usual. Have a great day, everyone. Chag Sameach.